then please feel free to take it away.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Roch Turner. You can see from the screen, and I'm sure you all have been waiting patiently with excitement to talk about strategic planning. In the interest of full disclosure, my Zoom skills aren't that great, so I think things will be fine, but I'm trying to minimize this screen here so that I can see what's going on. I'll do my best. So I'm an AmeriCorps Vista alum. For inspiration, I'm drinking coffee today out of my Vista alumni mug. I served in AmeriCorps about 6 years ago as a Vista at the Bitterroot College in Hamilton, Montana. Prior to that, I was in the Navy as an intelligence analyst on an aircraft carrier and for NATO. As a small business owner, over the last 5 years, I've worked full-time for the University of Montana, writing curriculum for workforce-based programs such as CDL, dental hygiene, a lot of medical-related curricula. Now I teach in the Department of Educational Leadership at the University of Montana, specifically in international education. And I'm a full-time educational researcher for a nonprofit. I research student outcomes and assessment, specifically non-grades-based assessment. Today, however, we're going to be discussing the strategic planning process, which, while not being the most exciting discussion, is pretty pivotal for most organizations. It's a critical part of finding success, achieving success as an organization, and really all levels of the organization need to be involved. So we're going to discuss how to best conduct a strategic planning process, how to implement, and how to evaluate. I think it's going to take about 45 minutes or so. Hopefully leave time for questions. Right now, I've got everything kind of minimized on my screen. So if you're typing questions, I probably won't see it until the very end. So if you have a question, it's probably a good idea just to hang tight with that question until the end, the last 15 minutes for questions. So let's begin. Well, see, already I've messed up. There we go. Okay, so like I just said, the strategic planning process is necessary for any organization. It doesn't matter the size, it doesn't matter the place, it doesn't matter the focus of the organization. Creating a quality strategic planning process is going to help the organization achieve success regardless of its situation. It basically sets the organizational focus. So regardless if you're working in education, if you're working with folks that are impoverished, any field, you need to have this focus established so that everybody working in the organization understands where the organization is heading, what is the future direction. It creates this clear vehicle for long-range plans and decisions, and this tidy map for performance monitoring. In other words, over the course of this process, we're going to fully understand where we're going in 5 years and what steps we're going to take along the way. And then by having this strategic plan in place, you'll be able to actually take it off a shelf or open it up on a shared drive or something and look at it to monitor how well the organization is doing in terms of meeting those long-term goals. When this plan is implemented correctly, and it's a good plan, it's going to save the organization a lot of money, typically saves a tremendous amount of time, and it helps kind of block the organization from this risk of failure that we unfortunately all organizations face. And finally, it just requires this initial framework to make informed decisions. So the strategic plan is going to create that. This strategic plan, it helps us put this solid work plan in place that's a building block for the next steps. So this process is going to unfold with a series of long-term and short-term goals that are really stepping stones. So with each achievement of a small short-term goal, you get a little bit closer to that that long-term goal and the overall 5-year plan. It requires the organization to examine really who they are on a regular basis, and more importantly, where they're going, constantly reevaluating the institution or the organization itself and making sure that you're on track. I tend to use Bryson's book. While it's outdated, 1995, it really is the seminal document for strategic planning for nonprofits. Bryson describes strategic planning as a disciplined effort to produce decisions and actions that guide and shape what the organization is, what it does, and why it does it. These processes are deliberate sets of expectations designed for the organization. And when I say deliberate, or when Bryson says deliberate, that's said with some specificity. It's very important that every step is thought out and planned. We don't want any haphazard actions. We want to be very clear about what we're doing. And the strategic planning process really encourages strong communications. We have to have quality communication at all levels in an organization to be successful. This creates accountability, and it enhances this ongoing learning process that every organization is constantly engaged in. So some important considerations. Again, communication plays a critical role. If we're not communicating at all levels, we have pretty high risk of failure. We're trying to inform everybody in the organization what we're doing and why we're doing it. We try to use that as a means of motivating them to achieve that goal, and we want to involve everybody we can in the organization. Collaboration also is an integral part of the decision-making process, this open dialogue and idea formulation that can only really happen with a group collaborative effort. We'll talk a little later about stakeholder involvement and who stakeholders are for your organization. And then lastly, the strategic planning process really should outline this accountability and responsibility for each person within the organization. So whether you're in a large or a small organization, everybody has a role to play. And so everybody should not only understand what their role is in achieving success, but also the roles and responsibilities of others so that we can work together and encourage success. So step one is preparing to plan. Some of your organizations have been around for a while and this stuff already exists. But for others, you're part of a new organization that doesn't have a strategic plan. And this phase one is for you. So the initial planning is going to focus on all of the steps required for success. Keep in mind, this entire process is built around trying to achieve organizational success, however your organization defines that. All of these roles and functions described and implemented in the strategic plan. Again, we want this document that we can access on a regular basis as a map. And so if we have questions about what our roles or functions are in each step, we can just pull it off the shelf and take a look. And if we have some attrition or replacement in our organization, which is bound to happen, the new person that's stepping into that role will have the roadmap in the strategic plan to look at and use as a reference, understand what they need to do to help the organization. We're going to focus on achieving the best fit between the organization and its environment. All organizations are impacted by their surrounding environment. We need to be mindful of what that environment entails. What are the different components of the environment and how might it impact our organization? And then our purpose statement, it must mirror our values and encourage direction. So not only does the ethos of the organization reflect the mission statement, but also as you read this mission statement, you'll really start to understand which direction you're going, so you can use that kind of as a beacon for direction. So now we get into the mission, vision, and values. Creating a mission statement, it can be a lengthy process. I think it's important that all of the stakeholders are involved in this process. The mission is going to describe what our shared values and vision are. So stakeholders might be funders, people that work within the organization, people that the organization is meant to aid. Everybody that's impacted by the organization should have a representative on this committee or this group that's creating the mission statement. We're focused on the core purpose of the organization. We want to know exactly what the organization is meant to do. And everybody from the board, administration, staff, community, you name it, everybody involved should understand clearly what our core purpose is of the organization. If you don't understand what the core purposes of your organization, it's hard to adjust your professional behaviors to align with that organizational ethos. So the mission statement should be fairly clear, and we don't want it to be too long. We don't want to write a novella length mission statement. So make it concise and clear and to the point. Effective mission statements deal with human needs. So we're going to address economics, relationships, growth, and the spirit of the organization. Human needs are pretty self-evident. Covey was not himself a researcher, but he brought together research in leadership from all of the sort of the seminal authors in leadership, and came to the conclusion that that these four components, economics, relationships, growth, and spirit, are a critical component to human needs within an organization. So are we well funded? Do we work well with the people that work within our organization? Do we find professional growth? And then what is the spirit of the organization in general? Is there an alignment between our personal needs and interests and that of the organization? I think with growth, it's important to understand that we tend to have two types of professional growth. One is in an effort to advance the organization in which we work. So we want to be always trying to become better at a professional capacity by means of bettering the organization we work for. But not always does that align perfectly with our personal long-term growth. And so we must also be focused on our professional development that will help us achieve our long-term growth. Sometimes those two align, and sometimes they are kind of off on a different path. But be mindful of that as you work within your organization, that you're trying to aid the growth of your organization as well as prepare yourself best for your future for your personal place professionally. After creating the mission statement, you're going to create a vision statement. The mission statement is telling your stakeholders what you're supposed to do. The vision statement is a little bit more nebulous and effectively is, what will the world look like if we effectively achieve our mission, right? So if our mission is to alleviate poverty in Flathead Valley, the vision would be something along the lines of, poverty no longer exists in the Flathead Valley. Just, you would probably want to be a little bit more eloquent than that, but you get the point. The vision statement is what the world would look like if the organization were truly effective in its mission. The effective vision statements need to communicate the vision. They need to actually let people understand what it is that you hope to receive from, what it is that you hope that your organization will accomplish. So all of this, of course, needs to be effectively communicated. It needs to focus on specific elements. So the mission should reflect the vision, and the vision should reflect the mission. It needs to be trustworthy and show trust in others. So in other words, this can't be a sort of a competitive thing where you're discussing other institutions or other organizations that are working in the same field. And it needs to understand that everybody involved in the organization is involved in the success of the organization. So every role matters. And then it's going to help you make decisions and solve problems. So if you communicate the vision constantly to everyone involved, then we can make our decisions based on what we hope our organization will achieve. Leaders within the organization, of course, need to promote a positive culture. I think we all inherently understand that. A negative organizational culture would be problematic. But we also need to promote a safe, efficient, and effective environment in order to promote the success of all stakeholders. If safety should always be your number one concern in the workplace. But there's a fine line between efficiency and effectiveness. and it's impossible to maximize both at the same time. Effectiveness is in one place and efficiency is in another, and we need to find the balance between efficiency and effectiveness so that we can achieve success on a reasonable time frame, and so that everybody's involved in that success. You of course want to collaborate with families and community. This is again a stakeholders issue. Leaders should be constantly mindful of stakeholders of the organization, and then all leaders should act with integrity, fairness, and an ethical manner. That leads us back to the trustworthy environment. If our leaders do act with integrity and they're fair among stakeholders and work in an ethical manner, even if we disagree with some of their decisions, I think we can generally respect somebody that falls into that category. So now we've got our mission and our vision statement prepared, and then we get into the real meat and potatoes of strategic planning. This is when we assess the strategic and planning environment by gathering data. So we're going to conduct a SWOT analysis. The first thing we need to do is review the organization's history and accomplishments. Where have we been? What have we done? Are we on the right path? Are our mission, vision, values, and guiding principles aligned with where we hope to be still? And then we need to assess the internal and external environments. What is it that's working well and what needs to be improved? There's always room for improvement, and hopefully there's always some small and large successes taking place. So we want to gather as much data as we can, especially in today's world. Data-driven decision making is important, and it's very useful in figuring out exactly how our organization is doing. Internal data about the organization, such as this budgetary information or worker performance, can be assessed internally. Professional development of personnel, it's always good to know what types of professional development people in the organization are engaged with. Again, I think it's important to be supportive of professional development that doesn't perfectly align with the mission of the organization. But also there needs to be professional development that does align with the mission of the organization. And as technology increasingly impacts our performance and our ability to perform at a high level, we need to assess our technology infrastructure to ensure that we have proper tech to get us down the road. Then we need to review the external data, such as political, economic, social, and external technological issues. I think I can say with some confidence that we live in a politically charged world at the moment, and so all politics will impact our organization, both local and national and global politics. The political situation also is clearly having an impact on our economic and social world, and that's something that we need to be mindful of. As different economic policies take place, they impact organization budgets in a pretty specific way, and those policies also impact how we can address social issues. And so if you're working in an organization that addresses social issues, which most national service members are, the political landscape matters. And then technological issues, external technological issues will really depend more on the type of organization that you're working with. For example, an organization that works with sensitive information of a particular population of people, we want to be sure that we have enough technology to keep that data safe from outside, hackers. But other technological issues, just ability to access other organizations. This one's a pretty broad category. So once we've done that assessment, we're going to conduct a SWOT analysis. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. This analysis really involves having input from all stakeholders, internal and external. So as you conduct the SWOT analysis, you want to be sure that there's at least a representative of each group each stakeholder group. If you're in a small organization, you may be able to bring the entire internal staff into this SWOT analysis. The input of the SWOT analysis is going to guide our strategic issues. Are going to allow us to really understand what our long-term goals are, whether or not they're realistic, what our short-term goals are, whether or not those are realistic, and how those two dovetail with each other so that we can achieve the success that we keep discussing. The SWOT analysis is also going to guide future communication strategies so that we can keep our internal and external publics informed. We want everybody to really understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. I've conducted a lot of these SWOT analyses in the past, and you'll find right away whether or not you're an organization that really focuses on strengths and likes to discuss the power of the organization, or maybe you work in an organization that's more visionary and you really like to discuss opportunities. Regardless, each organization tends to have a greater focus on one of these four areas. And in the beginning of the process, it's okay to have a conversation that focuses on one area, but at some point it's critical that we move away from whatever portion of the SWOT analysis that we naturally gravitate toward and begin to focus on all four categories, because all four really make a difference, and they matter in terms of our achieving success. So once we've collected the SWOT analysis, we can really begin to make strategic decisions for the organization, and then we can discuss what that strategy is going to be for success, and whether or not our organization is actually ready and capable for the change that the strategic plan will create. So these strategic issues are the organizational goals and objectives that the strategic plan is hoping to address. So if we have a pretty glaring weakness in the organization that emerges through the SWOT analysis, or a series of weaknesses, we want to be able to address that and make plans so that those weaknesses don't create obstacles for us in the future. Likewise, we want to build on our strengths. We want to pursue our opportunities, and we want to shield ourselves from threats, or at least prepare ourselves for what might happen if those threats come to be. Throughout this process, because all of the stakeholders are involved, you should be able to gauge what the organization's readiness for change is. If you have an entire staff that just says, this is the way we've always done it, and so this is the way that we should continue to do it, you might have some difficulty. I find that organizations that are staffed with younger people tend to be a little bit more dynamic, a little more visionary, and less cemented in the way that things have always been. So if you're working in an organization with a predominantly older age group, it may take some persuasion. It might take some discussions about why it matters that the organization changes. And we have to incorporate these different elements of change theory into the planning process. All organizations are really humanist organizations. Organizations are comprised of the people that work within the organization. And so we can change. We have the capacity to change. But if we don't take the human needs into account, the organization is unlikely to proceed with that change. And that really requires an analysis of the internal stakeholders' roles in the planning process. How much have the stakeholders been involved in these earlier stages? And then as we implement, how much will the internal stakeholders be involved in those processes, and whether those roles are suited for their individual personalities and positional responsibilities. Our individual personalities should not conflict with our positional responsibilities. There should be some sort of an alignment. But throughout the strategic planning process, we may have changed positional responsibilities. And so this is part of the analysis of whether or not people are working in the capacity of the organization that best suits them and the organization. So after compiling this data collected throughout the SWOT analysis, we're able to address the organizational readiness for change, and then we can pay some focus on the administrative, financial, and governance priorities, what it is we're supposed to do, and what outside forces will either help us or prevent us from being successful. And then we can actually write the strategic plan down. It's important to note that you might find strategic plan templates online, but there's no one strategic plan. Each individual organization should feel free to create the strategic plan in a format that is useful for everybody within the organization. So some might be very technical and sort of a bulletized strategic plan. Others might be more of a narrative based. That's something that throughout this conversation with your stakeholders, you should be able to understand what works best for your organization. So we're going to go into creating the strategic plan next. We need to create goals and objectives for our organization. So it's one thing to say in 5 years we will have accomplished this mission, but if we don't know what we're doing between now and the next 5 years, it's going to be very difficult to actually achieve that success. It's kind of like the old adage, if you don't plan, you plan to fail. So once our core future strategies are decided and all of our priorities are set and in place and we know exactly what we're going to do, we can start discussing these goals and objectives throughout within the organization. We're going to create both long-term strategic objectives. So these, like the slide says, provides a high-level view of items between where we are today and that future state, broken down in a balanced way. So these long-term strategic objectives that are quite a ways down the road, we're going to work our way back through a series of short-term objectives to give us a very clear roadmap of how we expect to achieve those long-term goals. Goals need to take into consideration financial issues. We want to be realistic. If our organization is strapped for cash, which is not uncommon, I think, especially for those of you working in the nonprofit world, are there financial issues that will prevent us from achieving these long-term goals? What are our customer concerns or client concerns for those that we're meant to serve? Are we creating goals that are going to help us impact our clients or our customers? How do we achieve this operational excellence? Can we be very concise and efficient and effective and all of those things that we discussed earlier, so that we can work at the top of our game? And then we need to take into account all of the people involved in the organization, because the people, like I said earlier, are the organization. And so if we're not taking them into consideration, that creates a pretty clear threat for the future. As a general rule, we don't want more than 7 long-term strategic objectives. I tend to stay closer to 5 when I conduct strategic planning sessions. I think 5 is a good. It gives us an opportunity to cover a lot of bases. If you get more than 7 long-term strategic objectives, it's really easy to start to experience this mission creep, where you're working outside of your stated mission and tend to be pulled a little thin. So with these clear long-term objectives that we've created based on the SWOT analysis and our understanding of stakeholder needs, we want to be sure that those goals and objectives, the short-term goals, can be identified, and each of the short-term goal leads us to success in one of our long-term goals. And we want all of these to follow the SMART acronym. The short-term goals are going to be specific, so they won't be nebulous, they won't be vague. It'll be a very clear, this is what we're going to do and this is when we're going to do it by. It's going to be measurable, so we understand what it means to succeed in that short-term goal. How do we measure success? We need to be able to articulate that. It, of course, needs to be actionable. If we can't take action on it, something that we can't actually do, then we're going to fail in the short-term goals. And we've stated that all of these short-term goals are incremental steps towards achieving a long-term goal. So if we set a short-term goal that's not actionable, something that we can't actually do, then we're not going to achieve the long-term goal. It needs to be realistic, and it needs to be time-bound. These short-term goals should be pretty specific. In the next month, in the next 3 months, in the next 6 months, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. And so you can follow the SMART acronym for your short-term goals, And along the way, you'll be able to take the strategic plan off the shelf and measure your success based on whether or not you're achieving these short-term goals. They can be arranged in a year-to-year basis. I like closer to 3-month short-term goals, at least beginning with 3 months, because even a year, a lot can happen over the course of a year that changes the short-term goals. And it is important to note that strategic plans it's a dynamic document. So as things change, and when we discuss our implementation, we'll discuss this a little further. But as things change, we need to be able to maintain some flexibility with our strategic plan. So I like the 3-month or 6-month goals, but they can be year to year, typically not much longer than a year to year basis. And virtual strategist admits that that's not always possible. So if you can in your planning process, that helps you have a longer term horizon. So you have goals that are with milestones that are due in year one. But if you can do a 3 or 6 month, that gives us very clear direction in our day-to-day activities within the organization. And so with these long-term and short-term goals established, we can really look at the financial impact of the plan and see if this thing is financially viable. And at this point, you really need leadership involved so that they can make the best market projections on the cost of each goal, and take into consideration whether or not the funding will be there in the future. If you live in an uncertain financial environment based on operating under grants or different policy funding decisions, you can look at each of those goals and say, well, in year 2 or in year 3, there may be a new state legislature, there may be a new federal government, this grant may dry up. And so you can make adjustments to that as you get closer and have a better understanding of the financial situation. And this usually requires management or leadership involvement. This good financial assessment is going to make the allowances for those external forces that you probably don't have any control over. Of course, we'll have a clear understanding of these internal forces, but to at least have some idea of what the external forces are that will have been identified in the SWOT analysis, it will give you something to look forward to and to monitor as you carry out the strategic plan. So at this point, the plan is assembled, right? So you've written it out step by step. Every person within the organization knows exactly what they're supposed to do. Each individual and each group understands their short-term goals, short-term objectives, and how it helps achieve the long-term goals, and then how that helps the overall organization achieve this strategic plan that hopefully will result in organizational success. And it's available in a form that is consumable by all of the stakeholders. So whether it's an online document, a binder, it's something that's accessible, that can constantly be looked at, reviewed, reflected upon, and monitoring your success and whether or not you collectively are on your road to success. This step requires the approval of all of those key members and stakeholders so that all of the actions are approved by the collective, so to speak, and will result in all of us working towards a shared goal, a shared vision, and really a clear understanding of what we hope to see with the organization. At the end of this phase, of phase 5, you're going to have a complete strategic plan, right? So everybody's agreed. We're all pretty excited. Strategic planning process is done. It was long, might have had a little bit of contention, but we're there collectively. Now what? So now we want to implement the plan. We're going to put this thing into use. So just for a quick review, strategic planning process requires the organization to examine where they are and where they're going. Something just happened with my screen. There we go. It's a disciplined effort to produce decisions and actions that guide and shape what the organization is, what it does, and why it does it. This is Bryson, 1995. And we've created this organizational purpose statement that mirrors our values and encourages the direction of our organization. We've created a mission and vision statement. The mission is what we do. The vision is what we hope to accomplish. We've conducted an in-depth SWOT analysis of our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We've asked the question of whether or not our organization is ready for change. We've established the goals and objectives to achieve success that are both long-term and short-term. So we're getting close now, and I look at my telephone, it's 11:36. I know you guys are probably just loving the PowerPoint, but we're getting there. So we want to manage the transition, right? What is the appropriate approval from leadership? In a perfect world, leadership will have been involved throughout this entire process, and so the approval would have already been gained. But in the event that the strategic planning process was delegated, you need to be sure that you then gain approval from leadership after the plan is created. We need to know that the individual changes needed for each of these short-term goals can be assessed. What is it that each person within the organization, what is their role, and how do they achieve success by using the strategic plan and taking action individually and as a collective matter with the larger, whether it's a department or a task group or whatever you want to label it as. And managers and staff should identify their role in the change and recognize the time limitations for each objective. This is part of earlier making sure that we adhere to the SMART acronym. We should understand what the time limitations are, and our objectives and goals should have been set with appropriate timetables in place so that we can ensure success. And most of these plans are developed with an annual schedule in mind. So you might work under a fiscal year or an academic year, whatever type of calendar your organization uses. You want these goals and objectives to align with that annual schedule. So once these changes needed for success are identified at the lower levels, it's possible to create these sort of discrete department level plans to trigger the intended changes. So if there's a group of you working on one plan, usually there's some sort of leadership in charge of that group, and that leadership can be paying attention to what each individual is doing and how that impacts the group work, so that at each level of the organization, we're still on the same page and we're still following this roadmap for success. No plan is complete if you don't talk about how you're going to execute it. You have to have a discussion about what it is that each person is going to do. What are their roles? How do we move forward together? So to that end, everyone in the organization needs a clear action plan. The strategic plan will have specific steps for each individual within the organization, and it should be role-based, not based on the person, because as we know, people come and go from organizations, and so as folks leave, somebody else should be able to step into their shoes, look at the strategic plan, and fully understand what their role is within the organization. It's also important to determine when groups will meet and talk about the strategy. It's one thing just to have the strategic plan and then individually we take it off the shelf and we make sure we're doing what we need to do. But we really need to be able to have a good conversation with each other, with everybody involved. Are we meeting our goals this quarter, this month, this week, this year? What are we doing to address areas of obstacles that maybe are preventing us from achieving these short-term goals? Having a good conversation collectively to ensure that everybody is moving down the road at the same pace, with the same motivations, and that everybody has the same sort of vision of success in mind that they did during the strategic planning process. So once we've implemented the final product and all the annual plans or action plans for the department or individual level, we're sort of on our way now, and we're carrying out the strategic plan. So now the final step for the strategic planning process is to evaluate and monitor exactly what we're doing, right? We want to be sure if we've got a 5-year strategic plan, throughout that 5-year, we need to be constantly monitoring the strategic plan and making sure that we're actually doing what we said we were going to do. Bryson has identified 4 primary reasons for failure. And that is insufficient resources, circumstances change, too many policies to maintain, or a shift in environment. If our strategic plan is to be successful, we need to make sure that we have sufficient resources, whether those resources are in the form of finances, make sure that our budget is in order, or that we have the people necessary to do the work. I think that sustainability of our workforce, our internal workforce, and our budget is of paramount importance. And so if we didn't sufficiently plan for our resources, and we don't have the level of resources we need to be successful, obviously we'll find some failure. Circumstances tend to change over time. This can be out of the hands of the organization, whether it's policy changes at the state or federal level, whether it's loss of a grant. It's hard to say, but usually these circumstances change out of our hands, and that can cause the strategic plan to be unsuccessful. If we've created a strategic plan that has too many policies, it's just too cumbersome, we just can't carry it out because there's too much to it. It's not quite simple enough. We'll probably fail. And then a shift in environment that also is outside of our hands. Politics tends to be a major component to shift in environment and how that impacts our organization. We're going to evaluate the strategic plan and the planning process as it goes on. Do the short-term and long-term planning process, is that helping to guide us down the road? Are our short-term goals still relevant? As we're on year 3 of the strategic plan. Are our short-term goals, have they been achieved? Do they continue to be achievable? And do they bring us to the final execution of the long-term plan and objectives? Are all the resources that were allocated and organized for each area of the plan, do they still remain in place? Are the people within the organization able to easily understand the strategic plan and what their goals are? Typically, this happens through being involved in the strategic planning process rather than being directed by the strategic planning process. And has it taken into account the needs of the organization's direct and indirect factors? Is the plan a product of collaboration among committee members? Again, this is back to making sure that all stakeholders are involved, that all stakeholders are at least represented. If you have a very large organization, you may not be able to involve all of the stakeholders, but there should be some representation of that stakeholder group. Has it been adopted by board members, leadership, the people that are most important in the organization for kind of giving the final, yes, let's move forward approval? And then do the yearly plans meet these following measures? Have the plans been staff developed and implemented so that the people on the ground or in the trenches, or whatever euphemism you want to use, are those people, are they involved in the development and implementation? Is it easily implemented and monitored and referenced? Can you access the strategic plan, take it off the shelf, and easily understand what you're supposed to do? And is it being watched on a regular basis? Does each yearly plan operate under the strategic plan? All of these yearly plans, short-term goals and long-term goals and objectives, should align with what this final vision of success is in the strategic plan. And are things still realistic to the needs of the organization? As the organization evolves and outside forces evolve, is our strategic plan still considered realistic? So the plan is going to need to affirm and monitor, update, or revise the plan at least once a year after the plan is implemented. So regularly monitoring this and saying, okay, well, this is something that we didn't see, we need to make some adjustments. That should happen at least on a yearly basis, if not more frequently, as it's relevant and as it makes sense to make changes to the strategic plan. You should. So it's not as though you halfway through the first year you realize there's issues and you say, nope, we can't change the strategic plan until the end of the year. You should be making those changes right away. And evaluating the needs of the process, that's a crucial part of further developing it and following the plan and making sure that the plan is dynamic and something that the organization can actually carry out. So one person from each area should be doing this monitoring. We're going to have a series of individual goals, but those individual goals should be part of a larger group goal. And there should be one person that's responsible for maintaining oversight over those goals and objectives and actions being taken to achieve the goals. And then as a team, we should be coming together at least once a year to have a larger discussion about whether or not the plan is effective. Are we actually achieving what we said we would achieve? And like I said at the very beginning, it's like a roadmap to uncharted territory, right? So we don't know what's coming in the future. We just know that something's going to happen, and we want to plan the best for it. And that's what we've been doing through this process. So here's a few resources that I've used. This has been recorded, and so I'll get back there. There we go. And so you can access this anytime. But if anybody wants to contact me directly and ask for a copy, I'm more than happy to do that. Let's see here. I'm going to go to the chat feature now. If anybody has any questions, now's the time. Just throw your questions in the chat box.
All right, well, if no one has any questions, I will end this session. But before I do so, I would like to say thank you, Roch, so much for facilitating this session today. And for everyone that can attend this Thursday, we've had a change of plans. Andrea Vernon cannot make the session on Thursday, so Josh Vanek, the Associate Director of Montana Campus Compact, will be facilitating the Creating Community Awareness and Stakeholder Involvement session. So please prepare for that change in facilitator. And please look for my email later today or tomorrow morning with a recap with the information from this session. And if no one has any questions again, I will end this meeting about 12 minutes early.
All right, well, you guys know